They mocked the quiet teacher until she tore them apart and left them begging for mercy. Maya Rodriguez had always been told she looked too young to be teaching. At 20, standing barely 5 feet 2 inches tall with her petite frame, oversized wire-rimmed glasses that constantly slipped down her nose, and soft-spoken demeanor that barely carried above a whisper, she could easily pass for one of her students at Roosevelt High School. Her long black hair was always pulled back in a conservative bun, and she favored cardigans and modest blouses that seemed to swallow her small frame. The administration had hired her as a long-term substitute for the notorious 10th grade English class in room 237 that had already driven away 3 teachers this semester. The previous instructor, Mrs. Hartwell, had lasted only 6 weeks before requesting a transfer to the elementary school across town, citing irreconcilable differences with student behavior. Before her, Mr. Thompson had quit after just 3 weeks, and Ms. Foster had lasted exactly 9 days before walking out mid-lesson, never to return. Maya needed the job desperately. Fresh out of college, with $37,000 in student loans breathing down her neck and no other opportunities in sight in the competitive teaching market. What nobody at Roosevelt High knew was that Maya had spent the last 12 years of her life training in mixed martial arts under the tutelage of her father, Sergeant First Class Miguel Rodriguez, a former Navy SEAL who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. After her mother's death in a car accident when Maya was 8, her father had insisted she learn to defend herself as they moved from one military base to another throughout her childhood. From Pendleton to Norfolk, from Fort Bragg to Camp Lejeune, Maya's routine never changed. Every morning at 5:30 before school and every evening after homework was complete, Maya spent 2 hours in the base gym practicing kicks, punches, grappling techniques, joint locks, and defensive maneuvers. She held a 3rd-degree black belt in Taekwondo, was proficient in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with extensive ground fighting experience, had studied Krav Maga with former Israeli Defense Force instructors, and could take down opponents twice her size without breaking a sweat or raising her heart rate above normal resting levels. Her father had taught her that the deadliest weapon was often the one nobody saw coming, and Maya's unassuming appearance was her greatest tactical advantage. But Maya had promised herself she would never use violence unless absolutely necessary, viewing her skills as a last resort that she hoped never to employ. The moment she walked into classroom 237 on that grey Monday morning in late October, Maya knew she was in trouble. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an uneven glow across rows of graffiti-covered desks and peeling motivational posters that hung askew on the dingy walls. The windows were streaked with dirt and looked out onto the school's cracked parking lot where weeds pushed through the asphalt. The students barely looked up from their phones, and the few who did gave her dismissive glances that made it clear they had already written her off as just another temporary authority figure who would be gone within weeks. In the back corner sat the trio that would make her life hell: Derek Martinez, the unofficial leader with his perfectly styled hair slicked back with expensive gel, designer sneakers that probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent, and a varsity Letterman jacket that proclaimed his status as starting quarterback on the football team. He was flanked by his loyal followers Tommy Chen, smaller in stature but with a cruel intelligence that glittered in his dark eyes and a reputation for psychological warfare that had reduced substitute teachers to tears, and Brad Williams, who served as the muscle of the group with his thick-set shoulders, intimidating 6'2" frame, and hands the size of dinner plates that he cracked menacingly whenever a teacher tried to discipline him. Derek was tall, athletic, and possessed the kind of casual confidence that came from 16 years of never facing real consequences for his actions, protected by his father's position on the school board and his mother's involvement in every major fundraising committee in the district. "Great, another baby teacher," Derek announced loudly as Maya set her worn canvas bag down on the teacher's desk, his voice carrying clearly across the room and causing several students in the front rows to turn around and snicker. What is she, like 16? Did they hire her straight out of high school? The class erupted in laughter, and Maya felt her cheeks burn red with embarrassment as she fumbled with her lesson plan folder. She cleared her throat nervously and attempted to begin the lesson on Shakespeare's character development techniques. But Derek's voice cut through her words like a knife through butter. "Miss, are you sure you're old enough to be here? Maybe you should be sitting with us students instead," he continued, his tone dripping with mock concern that fooled no one. "I mean, you look like you could be in my little sister's grade, and she's in 8th grade." More laughter filled the room, and Maya noticed how the other students either joined in enthusiastically or looked away uncomfortably, shifting in their seats but unwilling to come to her defense. Nobody wanted to make themselves a target by standing up for the substitute teacher who would probably be gone in a few days anyway. For weeks, the pattern continued and escalated with military precision. Derek and his friends would arrive exactly 7 minutes late every single day, making elaborate excuses that disrupted the entire class and forced Maya to restart her lessons from the beginning. "Sorry we're late, Miss Rodriguez," Derek would say with exaggerated politeness. "But there was a medical emergency in the hallway. Someone spilled their lunch, and we had to make sure nobody slipped and got hurt. We're just being good citizens." The transparent lies were delivered with such mock sincerity that Maya couldn't call them out without seeming petty, and the rest of the class would snicker at her obvious frustration. They would accidentally knock her books off the desk while walking by, sending carefully organized lesson plans scattering across the floor and forcing Maya to scramble to collect them while maintaining her composure in front of 30 watching teenagers. They would scatter her carefully prepared handouts by bumping into her desk when she wasn't looking, then offer to help clean up the mess they had created with false concern that made their guilt obvious to everyone except the administration. The comments about her appearance became increasingly personal and degrading. "Did you buy that cardigan in the children's section?" Tommy would ask during quiet reading time, his voice just loud enough for half the class to hear. "My little cousin has the same one from Gap Kids." When Maya wore her hair down one day, Brad made loud observations about how she looked like a high school student trying to play dress-up as a teacher. "Are you wearing your mom's clothes today, Miss Rodriguez? Because that outfit is way too mature for someone who looks like they're still waiting for their growth spurt." Maya tried writing them up multiple times, documenting each incident carefully and submitting detailed reports to the administration. But Principal Johnson seemed more interested in avoiding parent complaints than supporting his temporary faculty. The meetings were always the same. Johnson would lean back in his leather chair, barely glancing at Maya's meticulously prepared documentation, and deliver variations of the same dismissive advice. "You need to establish better classroom management," he told Maya during their brief meeting, his tone suggesting that the problem was entirely her fault for not commanding respect. "These boys are just testing boundaries like teenagers do. Show them you're in charge. Maybe try being a little more strict, a little more authoritative. Sometimes you have to raise your voice to get their attention." But how could Maya show authority when Derek's father, Robert Martinez, was not only on the school board, but also the chairman of the budget committee that determined teacher salaries and funding for educational programs? How could she discipline Tommy when his family had donated $50,000 for the new gymnasium and had their name permanently etched on a bronze plaque by the main entrance? The boys seemed completely untouchable, protected by their parents' influence and the administration's reluctance to take any action that might jeopardize future donations or create political complications. The harassment moved beyond the classroom and began to infiltrate every aspect of Maya's daily routine at Roosevelt High. In the narrow hallways between classes, Derek would bump into Maya hard enough to make her stumble and drop her materials, then apologize with elaborate mock sincerity that made his intentions crystal clear to anyone watching. "Sorry, Miss Rodriguez, didn't see you there. You're so tiny. Maybe you should wear bright colors so people can spot you easier. Or maybe carry a little flag so we know where you are." The hallways would echo with laughter from students who witnessed these encounters, and Maya learned to hug the walls and time her movements to avoid peak traffic periods. During lunch duty, Tommy would make loud comments about her eating habits that carried across the entire cafeteria, ensuring maximum humiliation for his captive audience. "Look at the baby teacher with her little sandwich cut into triangles," he would announce to his table of friends, his voice projecting clearly across the room. "Does your mommy pack your lunch for you? Did she leave you a nice note telling you to have a good day at school?" Other students would turn to stare, some laughing openly, while others watched with uncomfortable expressions, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't heard anything. The three boys had developed a systematic approach to psychological warfare that went far beyond simple classroom disruption. They would stand in groups near Maya's classroom door between periods, forcing her to squeeze past them while they made barely audible comments about her appearance, her teaching ability, and her obvious youth. "She's so small, you could probably pick her up with one hand," Brad would mutter, just loud enough for Maya to hear as she passed. "I bet she weighs less than my backpack." Maya's breaking point should have come during the infamous accident in the cafeteria on a particularly crowded Tuesday afternoon, when Brad deliberately positioned himself in Maya's path while she carried a full tray of food from the teacher's lunch line. The collision was carefully orchestrated and perfectly timed for maximum impact and witness coverage. Spaghetti sauce splattered spectacularly across her white button-down blouse, marinara covered her face and glasses, and the plastic tray clattered to the floor with a sound that silenced the entire cafeteria for a moment before the laughter began. Maya stood there in the center of the room, dripping with sauce and pasta, feeling the eyes of 300 students and a dozen faculty members focused on her humiliation, while Derek recorded the whole incident on his phone with obvious glee. "This is going straight to social media," he announced gleefully, holding his phone up to get the best angle of Maya's sauce-covered face. "Clumsy teacher can't even walk straight. Maybe they should teach basic motor skills in education school." The video was uploaded to Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok within minutes, complete with crying, laughing emojis and hashtags like "clumsy teacher" and "babysitter fail." But Maya didn't break, even as she heard students recording follow-up videos and providing commentary on her appearance. She walked slowly to the nearest bathroom, cleaned marinara sauce out of her hair and off her glasses with methodical precision, changed into the spare blouse she had started keeping in her desk drawer specifically for incidents like this, and returned to teach her afternoon classes with quiet dignity that only seemed to frustrate her tormentors further. Her father had taught her that real strength meant choosing your battles wisely and never letting your enemy see you lose control, and she wasn't ready to abandon her principles over teenage cruelty, no matter how calculated and persistent it became. The bullying intensified when Derek realized that humiliating Maya publicly only seemed to make her more determined. He began spreading rumors that she was incompetent, that she cried in the supply closet between classes, that she was too weak to handle real students. Other teachers started looking at her with pity, and Maya could feel her professional reputation crumbling. "Maybe you should consider a different career path," suggested Mrs. Patterson from the math department during a faculty meeting. "Teaching isn't for everyone, especially when you're dealing with challenging students." Maya wanted to scream that she wasn't weak, that she could defend herself better than anyone in the building, but she bit her tongue. Violence wasn't the answer. There had to be another way to earn respect and maintain order in her classroom. Everything changed on that fateful Wednesday afternoon during sixth period, exactly 3 weeks and 2 days after Maya had started working at Roosevelt High. The October sky outside was gray and threatening rain, and the fluorescent lights in classroom 237 cast their usual harsh glow over the worn desks and faded motivational posters. Maya had been trying to lead a discussion about character development in Romeo and Juliet, specifically analyzing how Shakespeare used internal conflict to drive external action, when Derek and his friends began their usual disruption routine with more energy and coordination than usual. This time, however, they had planned something special that would cross every line of decency and professional respect. "Miss Rodriguez," Derek called out, raising his hand with the kind of fake politeness that immediately put Maya on alert. His smile was too wide, too confident, and his eyes held a glint of anticipation that made her stomach tighten with apprehension. "I think there's something wrong with your shirt. You might want to check it out." Before Maya could react or even process what he meant, Tommy had moved with surprising stealth behind her chair while she was writing character analysis notes on the whiteboard. Her back was turned to the class for less than 30 seconds, but it was enough time for them to execute their plan with military precision. As she turned around to face the students, Derek grabbed one sleeve of her grey cardigan, while Tommy grabbed the other sleeve from behind, and Brad positioned himself directly in front of her with his phone ready to record. In one swift, coordinated movement that they had obviously practiced, Derek and Tommy pulled in opposite directions with enough force to tear the cardigan straight down the middle. The sound of ripping fabric was loud enough to silence the entire classroom instantly, but they didn't stop there. This was just the opening move in their carefully choreographed humiliation. Brad lunged forward before Maya could cover herself and grabbed the collar of her white button-down blouse with both hands, yanking hard enough to pop 4 buttons and tear the fabric completely across her shoulder and halfway down her back. The cotton ripped with a sound like a gunshot, and Maya felt the cool air of the classroom against her exposed skin as her shirt hung in tatters around her shoulders. Maya stood there in front of 30 students, her torn cardigan hanging from her arms in strips, her white blouse ripped open to reveal her plain beige bra and the pale skin of her shoulder and back, while Derek's phone captured every humiliating second from multiple angles. The classroom erupted in shocked gasps, nervous laughter, and whispered comments that seemed to echo from every direction. Some students immediately looked away in embarrassment, others stared in stunned silence, and a few took out their own phones to record secondary videos of the incident. Maya felt exposed, violated, and utterly humiliated in a way that went far beyond anything she had experienced in her 20 years of life. This wasn't just bullying anymore. This was assault, public humiliation, and a violation of her basic human dignity that crossed every boundary of acceptable behavior. The feeling of dozens of teenage eyes on her partially exposed body made her skin crawl, and she could already imagine the videos spreading across social media within minutes. "Oops," Derek said with a smirk that showed he felt no remorse whatsoever, still recording with his phone held steady to capture every detail of her humiliation. "Looks like the baby teacher had a wardrobe malfunction. Maybe you should shop in the adult section next time instead of shopping in the kids department." Tommy laughed and added his own commentary for the video. "I guess someone forgot to buy grown-up clothes when they started pretending to be a real teacher." For 12 years, Maya had practiced control under the watchful eye of her father and a series of military instructors who had taught her that discipline was the difference between a warrior and a brawler. For 12 years, she had channeled her training into discipline and restraint, learning to walk away from confrontations and de-escalate situations before they turned violent. For 12 years, she had chosen peaceful solutions over violent ones, believing that there was always another way to resolve conflict without resorting to the skills that could seriously injure or even kill another human being. But as she stood there, partially undressed in front of her students, while 3 teenage boys laughed at her humiliation and recorded it for posterity, something deep inside Maya snapped with an almost audible crack. Every lesson her father had taught her about choosing battles wisely, every principle she had developed about turning the other cheek, every belief she held about solving problems without violence, all of it evaporated in an instant of pure, crystalline rage. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. Maya's posture shifted from defensive to predatory in a heartbeat. Her shoulders squared, her stance widened, and her eyes took on a cold, calculating look that made several students instinctively lean back in their seats. "Put the phone down," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that nobody had heard before. Derek laughed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. "What are you going to do about it, baby teacher? Cry some more?" Maya moved faster than anyone thought possible. Her right hand shot out in a lightning-quick strike that knocked the phone from Derek's grip, sending it clattering across the floor. Before he could react, Maya's left hand grabbed his wrist and twisted it behind his back in a textbook restraint hold that made him yelp in pain. "I said put it down," Maya repeated calmly, applying just enough pressure to Derek's wrist to make him understand she was serious. Tommy and Brad stood frozen, unsure whether to help their friend or back away. The decision was made for them when Maya released Derek's wrist and turned to face them both. What they saw in her eyes made them take an involuntary step backward. "You want to know what happens when you push someone too far?" Maya asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "You want to see what the baby teacher is really capable of?" Tommy, perhaps trying to salvage his reputation in front of the class, made the mistake of charging forward with his fists raised. Maya sidestepped his clumsy attack effortlessly, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to flip him over her hip in a perfect judo throw. Tommy hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him, staring up at the ceiling in shock. Brad, bigger and stronger than his friends, approached more cautiously. "You can't touch us," he growled. "We'll have you fired for this." "You're absolutely right," Maya replied, settling into a fighting stance that made her look like a completely different person. "I probably will get fired, but you know what? I don't care anymore. You want to humiliate me. You want to tear my clothes off in front of the class. Then let's see how you handle someone who fights back." Brad threw a heavy right hook that would have floored most people, but Maya ducked under it smoothly and drove her knee into his solar plexus. As he doubled over, gasping for air, Maya grabbed his shoulders and brought her knee up again, stopping just short of his face. "That's called restraint," she told him quietly, "something you never learned." Derek, meanwhile, had been backing toward the door, but Maya's attention turned to him with laser focus. "Where do you think you're going? We're not finished here." "I'm telling my father about this," Derek threatened, but his voice cracked with fear. "He'll have you arrested." "Good," Maya replied, walking toward him with the controlled grace of a predator. "Tell him all about how you and your friends sexually assaulted a teacher by tearing her clothes off. I'm sure he'll be very proud." Derek's face went pale as he realized the legal implications of what they had done. "It was just a joke. We were just messing around." "Funny thing about jokes," Maya said, now close enough that Derek could see the controlled fury in her eyes. "They're supposed to be funny for everyone involved." What happened next would be talked about at Roosevelt High for years to come. Maya didn't throw a single punch, but she didn't need to. Using a combination of pressure points, joint locks, and psychological intimidation, she had Derek on his knees within seconds, tears streaming down his face as he begged her to stop. "Please," he whimpered. "I'm sorry, I'm really sorry." "Are you sorry because you got caught? Or are you sorry because you finally understand what it feels like to be powerless?" Maya asked, maintaining the pressure point on Derek's shoulder that was causing him such exquisite discomfort. "I understand," Derek gasped. "I get it. I won't do it again." Maya held him there for another moment, then released her grip and stepped back. Derek collapsed forward, clutching his shoulder and crying openly in front of the entire class. The classroom was dead silent except for the sound of Tommy still trying to catch his breath and Brad groaning as he slowly got to his feet. 30 students sat in stunned silence, their phones forgotten, their attention completely focused on the small woman who had just dismantled 3 bullies without breaking a sweat. "Here's what's going to happen," Maya announced to the class, pulling her torn cardigan closed and speaking in the same calm voice she used for literature discussions. "You 3 are going to apologize to me and to every student in this class for disrupting their education with your behavior. Then you're going to clean up this classroom, organize all the books you've scattered over the past month, and write a 5-page essay about the consequences of bullying." "And if we don't?" Brad asked weakly, still holding his stomach. Maya smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then we can continue this discussion, and next time I won't be so gentle." The next day, word had spread throughout Roosevelt High like wildfire. Students whispered in the hallways about the quiet English teacher who had taken down 3 of the toughest guys in school. The story grew with each telling. Some said Maya had thrown Derek through a window. Others claimed she had made Tommy cry for his mother. Principal Johnson called Maya into his office first thing that morning, his expression stern. "Miss Rodriguez, I've heard some very disturbing reports about yesterday's incident." Maya sat calmly in the chair across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap. "I assume Derek's father has been in touch." "Actually, no," Principal Johnson said, looking surprised. "Neither Derek nor his parents have made any complaints. In fact, Derek's father called to thank the school for finally addressing his son's behavior problems." Maya raised an eyebrow. "I see. What I want to know is how you managed to get through to those boys when 3 other teachers couldn't." Derek Martinez turned in his first completed assignment in 2 years this morning, and he actually apologized to Mrs. Patterson for disrupting her math class last week. For the first time since the incident, Maya allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes people just need to understand that their actions have consequences. The change in classroom dynamics was immediate and dramatic. Derek, Tommy, and Brad sat quietly in the back corner, completing their assignments without complaint. Other students who had been afraid to participate before began raising their hands and engaging in discussions. The disruptive atmosphere that had plagued the classroom disappeared overnight. Word of Maya's transformation spread beyond Roosevelt High. Other teachers began asking her for advice on classroom management, and the principal requested that she lead a workshop on dealing with difficult students. Maya politely declined the workshop, preferring to let her results speak for themselves. 3 weeks after the incident, Derek approached Maya's desk after class, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine nervousness. "Miss Rodriguez," he said quietly, "I wanted to say something." Maya looked up from grading papers. "What is it, Derek?" "I wanted to apologize. Not just for that day, but for everything. The way I treated you wasn't right, and I know that now." He paused, struggling with words that didn't come naturally to him. "You could have really hurt us that day, but you didn't. You showed us mercy when we didn't deserve it." Maya studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity, but found none. "And what did you learn from that?" "That being strong doesn't mean hurting people who are weaker than you," Derek replied. "It means protecting them, and that real respect has to be earned, not taken." Maya nodded slowly. "That's a very mature perspective, Derek. I'm proud of you for reaching that conclusion." As Derek left the classroom, Maya reflected on the strange turn her teaching career had taken. She had come to Roosevelt High as a young, inexperienced substitute, trying to make it through each day without incident. She had endured weeks of humiliation, harassment, and disrespect while maintaining her commitment to peaceful resolution. But sometimes Maya realized peace had to be fought for. Sometimes standing up for yourself meant showing people exactly who they were dealing with. She hadn't become a bully herself. She had simply refused to be a victim any longer. The final bell rang, and Maya gathered her papers, preparing to head home. As she walked through the hallways of Roosevelt High, students nodded respectfully as she passed. Some even smiled and said hello. The transformation was complete. She was no longer the weak substitute teacher who could be pushed around with impunity. She was Miss Rodriguez, the teacher who had earned her place through strength, wisdom, and the courage to stand up for herself when it mattered most. Maya had learned that sometimes the greatest violence is allowing yourself to be destroyed by those who refuse to show respect. By finally fighting back, she hadn't lost her principles. She had found them. And in teaching Derek, Tommy, and Brad that actions have consequences, she had taught them the most valuable lesson of their lives.